So the starting point here is kind of my generated stuff from Substance Painter that, as you see, it's pretty messy because I didn't feel like I have enough control yet in Substance. So that's why I went to the 2D painting software. So this is just a time lapse of me painting over. And while the UVs are helping me to very easily paint exactly where I want it, this also adds an extra layer of ease for me because, well, I see exactly where things are. So basically just indicated it in Substance Painter. It wasn't working out. So in the end, you'll see I kind of completely scrap it because I tried to have this kind of cool angled highlight, but in the end, it just didn't look right. So you'll see me change my mind at some point and then just go over. But overall, I like this. I like this way of approaching it, of kind of generating, doing indications in the 3D software because you can see exactly on the 3D model where things are going to go, but then going into where I feel more comfortable, which is 2D painting engine, just kind of finishing up things in there. But honestly, whatever works for you, there's no reason why you couldn't do it fully in the 3D software. You just see that I had my trouble, kind of. And apologies, it doesn't really show that well where I'm kind of painting, the cursors hitting, so you just see things changing. But it'll show at least my trial and error of, I keep saying that, I think, but sometimes it's just worth it to just drop it all and start over. And you might get to the end result faster than just trying to squeeze some juice out of shit. There you go. I've decided it doesn't work, so I'm completely getting rid of the weird angled highlights, painting it over, all simplifying it a lot more, I think, which is exactly what helped. So I have the two separations in the metal, and then I'm adding some kind of a sharp edge with its own stylization in there, kind of a main highlight. Even at this stage, I kind of knew that it's much better. It's much better direction than what I've had before. But again, as easy as it is to see where and what you're painting in 3D, I still found it a bit kind of hard to do exactly what I wanted, or at least in terms of kind of stylistic 2D painted look. This was much simpler. Very easy to overdo some things as well. You want to add all the details in the world, but there's no need sometimes. So yeah, I'm really being picky and careful where I add the details and all the highlights and everything. I want it to, well, obviously look interesting, but I don't want it to look almost like overworked. I think less details in the right places is better than details all over. So let's see what's been done in here. So I'm going to add a top light, which is just a fill layer with a color, using just the color. And the mask is the generator with a light on. So very easy to change if I wanted the mask to be a bit different. Very strong generator, very nice. So the reason I'm doing this is I want to have separations in my textures of the different planes already. You'll see it a lot in stylized art, where it seems like the object already has light coming from somewhere. And in this case, I am taking into consideration, okay, more often than not, it's going to be seen sort of from this angle, right? We're barely going to be seeing it held like this or too many other ways. So this is going to look best in most scenarios. Wherever it kind of was, you can judge it a bit more, of course, if you're building some scene a bit differently, but that's kind of my idea. I have a bit of separations, and it does look nice that way, because the texture itself is going to be doing so much work and not so much with the final lights and shadows, even though I do want it to have, be affected by it later on as well. So yeah, so you see we have these harsh highlights, of course, they're exaggerated all in here. Then the second one, you might have missed it, is just highlights around the edges of the blade. If I go into mask, you're going to see it a little bit better. You see, it goes all around if I turn off most of the layers. So this is just a mask editor. You add it by doing a generator, and then you just pick a mask editor, and it's there. Then you have a lot of settings to play around with. Mostly I'm interested in curvature, and then maybe some textures, if that helps me. I'm sharpening the whole thing, painting over to get rid of the stuff where I don't want it to be. Adding a blur slope, which is still on default. You can see a grunge map here, but it doesn't do anything because source type needs to be changed to custom noise, and then you'll get a different kind of noise. But I was playing around with it. I didn't get anything that looked more than what I needed than the default one. And then since it's so overpowering and even across everywhere, I'm getting rid of it in areas where I don't want it. So I want it mostly on the blade and the corners in here. And the reason for that is that I've painted my highlights here and kind of here. Well, the blade, I want it to stand out, so I have it all across. But then the highlight here looks nice with the kind of connection here and all the detail going on. And then since I have the highlight here, I'm adding some more highlights on the edges as well. So it kind of integrates and looks better. Doing a sharpness across the whole thing. I'll turn it on and off so you can see it better. On, off, on. Zoom in very close so it doesn't get messed up. And if I go into there, just colors off. You see, like from painting, you can get a bit of a blurry look once you're, going over and over things. So this is just nice to bring back those details. Let's go back to material, because here I'm going to start adding the roughness for the blade. So this first one is just kind of adding random splotches of roughness, taking away from the default. Mask. And this is just a grunge map with a blur slope. So this is just a fill, add, fill. You pick a grunge that you like, you can drag and drop it on here, and then I'm adding the blur slope on top as well. Nothing too much, pretty much default stuff in here. So without the slope, it looks like this, then adding that. And then basically, since this is the roughness with the amount I wanted, it gets controlled how much that amount shows through this mask. So this is kind of just to break things up a little. And then the second one is across the whole thing. But with the two of them, I'm having a bit of a variation. So here is just a fill layer again with the roughness added on top and then a blur slope underneath instead of the mask. But it's a similar approach. Without it, you start seeing, all the details with it kind of stylized. Next part is going to be same treatment on these metal bits. So you see same exact thing. I did treat it a little bit differently. These have some metalness values, or actually they don't. If I turn it off, nothing's gonna change, because I see it's black. So ignore this, it does not have metal values. So it's just roughness treatment. And also I have two different kind of bit of roughness with two different kind of masks. And there's a mask on top of the whole thing. So ignore that it showed here. The group has a mask on these things. So these actually do not appear in the final. And it's the same treatment, fill layer with a grunge and a blur slope on them. Very simple. Here I'm just getting rid of the wood wood masks. Well, not wood mask, but the wood roughness. It's also just 2 layers in a group. That's wood, and then I'm adding some roughness. One thing to note in here is that since the wood is basically kind of strands kind of going in one direction, I try to find a grunge that will do a similar thing. So now that it shows too much in the end, you can barely see it, but maybe in a certain light, it'll catch some of that highlight, and you'll be able to see that it's kind of, more or less following the pattern, and it's not just random. And as a final thing, I'm adding a color balance just to bring all of the textures back together. So even when painting, I paint this thing, I paint this thing, I paint those little things, and then the wooden part, and then it can start kind of falling apart and away from each other. And color balance just brings it back together, because I can adjust shadows, highlights, midtones, and more magenta in here, more red in there, and it brings all of the pieces of the single prop together into one kind of color space. And not to mention, it was starting to look very green, yellow, kind of sickly, and just having more purple, blue makes it look a bit more cold steel and better fitting for the prop. So that was my substance painter. And then from this on, I wanted to play around a bit more on it in Blender, just to see if I can get even more nicer look with the shader and adjustments in there. So we'll take a look at that next. Okay. So for the setup in Blender, it's also pretty simple, even though I kind of played around with it quite a bit, but I didn't want to push it too far, and it's not that I even know how to really. So just a few extra bits. First, I'll address the line art. So you can ignore that it looks so fat in here because it's kind of screen based. So see, if I zoom in, it becomes thinner. The best view is what I judged on is the render. So you see the render, it has the line art kind of the way I want it. That's done through just Shift A, grease pencil, and scene line art, which is going to take all the objects in the scene and give them this line art. The important bit is to have a camera, because you'll see if I move the camera around, the line art changes. So since the line art, the scene kind of like on the grease pencil, you see you'll have the line art modifier added, and which is picking up the whole scene, source type scene, see, not object, not collection, scene. So it looks at things like contour, which it needs the camera to do that. And so, it picks up the contour. So that's why, when I'm looking through here, I have this kind of weird line. It seems in the middle here as well, but from the camera, it looks nice. So the final judgment should be done through the camera. So I've added one line art, scene line art, which only has contour. I have everything else turned off. I played around with the thickness to my liking, and that's about it for this one. And then I added another line art to the scene, turned contour off, left everything else on, played around with the threshold here. You see it's got more or less of that line art that you can get. I'll just undo that. And then I have subdivided it, which is, under the modifiers in the grease pencil line art. And then I added some noise and messed around with the settings in here. So it's kind of, again, all to your liking, but this way I could have these lines to be a bit more kind of stylized looking and nice. Now, if we just take a look at get rid of this guy. Nope. In between, join areas, gone. Okay. So if we take a look at this. So here, it's again, a very simple kind of setup, but it's a nice little trick to get the highlights with this weird edge. Is the only thing pretty much that I've added. Otherwise, all these are just the exports from Substance Painter. Here I'm inverting the green color because it was the wrong kind of normal for Blender. So you can do separate RGB, invert the green, combine RGB. This is just normal node, combine it again, and then it goes into normal, and that's fine. Some specular and metallic are in here without a map, which is just because I like the look of having it sort of halfway metallic. It's not correct or anything. Usually, at least in realistic renders, you'll find it's either, fully metallic or fully non-metallic. It's rare that you'll have an in-between, maybe on some dusting on metal or something, but here it's just all about how it looks. And so the main work went on adding a bit of stuff on top of the base color for me. So if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which comes by default, Fresnel does not exist here for me, then you can do Control-Shift and click, and you'll see there's a whole line going here into Viewer and then in Material, and it shows you how this, the node path all the way up to here looks on here. So here what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a specular shader, I'm turning it into RGB with shader to RGB node, and then I'm adding a color ramp and adjusting the few colors that I have. You can add even more if you want to add some more crazier stylization. The nice thing about this is that it is a shader that's being turned into something kind of 2D, I guess, RGB to work with. So if I move my lights around, it changes. So usually I try to keep the stuff I work with interactable like this, with the lights, and not so super specific, kind of baked in. So I really like the shader to RGB node for that. Then I'm grabbing a noise texture, which is just noise, and I have some crazy scaling in there. Tone it down. That goes into a color ramp, which didn't seem to do too much. Oh, besides, I think I'm just kind of inverting it, right? Because the white is on the other side now. And then I'm adding a math node with a greater than, which gives us, you'll see in a moment, this thing. So now you see when I'm adjusting the scale, I can mess up the edge of that specular, and that's because, kind of the gradient that we have in between. So you can adjust that as well if you want to. You should keep it quite sharp but I just like the stylization that you can get. And you can obviously use different kind of noises, get different kind of results, or even combine on top of each other. There's a lot that can happen there. Then I'm just adding a color ramp on the resulting thing just to give it a different color. It's a flat color, so it's nothing too fancy. And here is just a Mix RGB node. Mix RGB, right, with a soft light selected through here. And my base color goes in color 1, and then this goes into color 2. And what I'll get is, it's on very low opacity, is my color map getting some kind of specular treatment. If I do it a bit higher, you'll see it becomes crazy. But a lot can happen with these. So it's in a similar way as you do your texturing in Substance Painter with all the masks. You can do quite a bit with shading as well for sort of these stylized things where you're creating sort of a mask, right, for the kind of shading you want to add on top. And this does go into base color, and our final map, final shader gets to look like this. So it's nothing too crazy see added, but it is a nice to have. It doesn't look as default, so there's a bit more coming through the shader as well, and not just the textures. Because I think that's not usually, but that's where I like seeing the stylization come through as well. Is like, how is the shader treatment happening instead of just the textures? So if I go in here, get rid of most of the things, it's starting to look like a stylized asset. So it's all experimental. I'm just trying to find nicer ways, and I will very likely continue making more props to build up a whole scene, and then, you start running into different kind of issues of making the whole scene look nice together, not just a single prop. And then there's more play in there with the styles. So thanks for watching. I hope there was some good stuff in it, and I'll see you next time.